I now call on stage Dr. Sashi Sangle and Dr. Mukund Penurkar, please. Dr. Sashi Sangle and Dr. Mukund Penurkar, please. Ma'am, we'll begin the session. I hand the mic over to you.
I welcome you all on this very interesting topic, which is very basic about glycosylated hemoglobin, and I think everybody is waiting here eagerly to listen to the talk by Dr. Chandalia. So I welcome him. Please, sir. I think it is very important to know about what is a level which we should follow and how to monitor which glycosylated hemoglobin level is to be considered in Indian population. So I think it is very important topic. Please, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. After that very interesting discussion on diet, we change gears and come to something very, very basic, very important for clinicians, and that is how do you clinically use A1C? And some of the basics of A1C I'll tell you. So from that you derive what kind of use should make of this test. A few basic concepts about A1C, very quickly. You see, when the glucose combines with hemoglobin, you generate a number of adducts, of which the predominant one is A1C. But remember, there is also A1B, A1A, and we get total glycosylated hemoglobin, it combines all. But now, most of the time, this is what is measured, and most of the data now are related to only the A1C fraction. Very important to know that it is a post-translational, non-enzymatic, substrate concentration dependent action. That means higher the amount of glucose in the blood, more is the attachment of the glucose to the hemoglobin, amino acid contained in the hemoglobin. But remember that the irreversible combination of not only glucose, but many other hexoses can also combine with the amino acids in the beta chain of hemoglobin. So this is a little bit about the history, you see, of A1C. Total glycated hemoglobin is different, of course, but what we use is A1C, we're confined to that. And this is a combination, the glucose molecule combined with the amino acid of hemoglobin. Most of the time it is the terminal valine. But combination can be with other amino acids on the hemoglobin molecule, and that will also give some more glycosylated products. History is interesting. The fast hemoglobins were known for quite some time. Let me just tell you how we got interested in this in 1976. We saw a short note in an European Journal of Biological Society talking about glycated hemoglobin. This was the time where not much interest was anywhere in the world on a large scale on glycated hemoglobin. So I persuaded my biochemistry colleagues at Jaslok that I would like this test to be started in our hospital. And this was an excellent biochemist colleague of mine, Dr. Krishna Swami. So we set out to start a chemical method, which was a very sturdy method at that time. And at that time, a lot of these machines you use now, which we are talking about 40 years ago now, they were not available, so we established a very nice chemical method, but we'll not talk about that today. We had a lot of publications on that, starting from one basic one to establish our claim that first one to do A1C in India is 1980. And then, of course, we have some very interesting aspects of this glycated hemoglobin, using it in a variety of situations, and using some glycation of other enzymes. We also studied, superoxide dismutase, glutathione transferase. So those are different publications we produced at that time. But I'll concentrate on A1C and some of the work that we have done. A lot of it is summarized in this last article in Current Science, where a lot of over 4 or 5 publications are put together. Anyway, I'll give you some very interesting aspect. This is the initial paper where we prospectively followed our patients with very large number of blood glucoses and established that when the glucoses were like this was the A1C, fair control, this was it, and poor control. So it showed that the method was working. And of course, a straight line, the relationship of glucose to glycosylated hemoglobin was shown. The methodologies, again, I don't want to go into great details because a lot of clinical aspects to discuss. But remember, most of the time, what we use now is really the HPLC method, most of the time. Most of the laboratories use that. Standardization of A1C and what is called harmonization is still required in our country. But as the most laboratories use this HPLC method, it does become comparable. The data from one part of country should be comparable with other. Very rarely, this is the method we used for some time initially as a research tool. And of course, the other two methods also, the moronic capacity method is very promising, and some of the machines are using that particular method. The interference of different substances, especially hemoglobinopathy, and what we call charged molecules of drugs. If the drug has ionic charge, after all, any chromatographic method, you can get changes because of charge of the molecule. And therefore, you'll find some drug interference in some of the methods, and of course, the hemoglobinopathies will alter some of the methods. Hemoglobinopathy is altered in two ways. One is, of course, the hemoglobin molecule itself abnormal, so glycation may change. And remember that I published one paper by some other author in the RSSDI journal when I was the editor, where a patient with severe diabetes had zero A1C. It was abnormal hemoglobin. You see, so this is possible. One thing very important I want to draw your attention to. As a laboratory method, hemoglobin A1C, the coefficient of variation is very, very low. In fact, by most good machines, it's 2 to 3%. I must tell you that blood glucose does not have that much accuracy as A1C has nowadays. See, that the blood glucose is now considered a more unreliable analyte in the laboratory because glycolysis can proceed in spite of your using a fluoride bulb. You think that fluoride bulb paralyzes all the oxidative enzymes and glycolysis will not occur, but it occurs. This has been proven that sample sitting there for a few days can give you, blood glucose of 10 or 0. So this test, therefore, has become very important because biochemically it is very sound. The methods you use and the variation it gives. Now we come to the clinical use, which is what you are concerned with. The A1C, of course, is a good estimation of average blood glucose. Remember one figure, that is magic figure of 7 that we keep teaching our patients, you should be below 7. Of course, this is not sacrosanct as we will see later on, but this corresponds to average blood glucose over the past 3 months. And we shall see later on is primarily past 2 months is 150. So this corresponds to 150. And remember, for 1% change in A1C, for you to understand the difference of average glucose is about 30 milligram. So remember, one figure 7 is 150, and you can derive from there. You see 30 milligrams up and down, and this is the average blood glucose of whole 24 hours and continuing for 2 to 3 months. When you use this test clinically, and early on, clinicians will be worried because the blood glucose will give you a different information in a given patient, and A1C or glycosylated hemoglobin will give you different. So the first about 4,000 estimations we had done. At that time, we tried to correlate with whatever blood glucose readings we got in the clinic, and quite often in the postprandial period. And remember that half of the patients, the interpretation was close to same. This good control by blood glucose, good control by A1C, and as the human behavior is very erratic, as you saw in case of diets in the previous lecture, erratic behavior. So there is one-step difference in 43%, and some of the two-step difference. Two-step difference means glycated hemoglobin says poor control and blood glucose says good control. This is because the patients alter their diet with the day they see you. So blood glucose is a highly manipulable test. We call it a manipulable test. A patient can manipulate it and show you very good value. To please the family members, one day a patient can produce very good value because he wants to partake of a good amount of sweets on those days or some special food to eat. And same person, in order to attract attention, can produce a very high value of blood glucose by eating wrong and therefore attract a lot of attention. So this is possible. See, this was not studied by many investigators at that time when we reported, and that is how fast does the dissipation of A1C occur. This is very interesting because you can use this clinically. If you take very high A1C value, which we did in this paper, which we again published in Current Science, and that is start with 11, we took a group of patients and treated it very efficiently with a sulfonylurea purposely, same molecule to treat everyone, and brought down the A1C very predictably. And you will see that first 2 weeks itself, the drop is 1%. And next 2 more weeks, another 0.7%. Or 4 to 6 weeks is another 0.5. So frankly, first about 6 or 8 weeks, most of the drop will occur. So you can utilize this test, not necessarily at the interval of 3 months, but 2 months is quite good. And when you're trying to derive some information very quickly, because you want to take some decisions, whether the patient is controlled or not, you can do it even at a month's interval, because there should be considerable change if truly the metabolic control has improved. At that point, we published this paper in Lancet because this was very interesting, stress hyperglycemia. So we wanted to see whether so-called stress hyperglycemia in the hospital patients are entering our ICUs with myocardial infarction and strokes are having tremendous stress. And at that time, many of them, the glucose is raised and they are not known to be diabetic earlier. And in fact, subsequently, we also followed them and correlated closely as to which were really diabetics and which were stress hyperglycemic. And we showed that even the transient stress hyperglycemia lead to glycosylation. So it means it will alter physiology, it will alter enzymes, it will alter the enzyme function, and therefore should be treated. This was our contention in showing this data that stress hyperglycemia should be treated. This is work of some other investigators showing that if you do a reading of A1C, it reflects to the extent of 50%, it reflects the past 1 month. And to the extent of another 40%, 90%, it reflects the past 2 months. It's amazing that many recommending bodies like ADA, ESD, all of them, while recommending the frequency of A1C test, quite often, in fact, the ADA earlier, some time ago, said 2 samples a year should be done. Then they came to 4 a year, you see, with difficulty. Of course, they're talking about economy. I don't know. You see, a country like America talking about economy. See, in something very crucial in judging the metabolic control of a parameter which really changes every 2 to 3 months, you should do every 6 months, is a very unscientific recommendation. So you can see that 2 months is a good period if you want to see, and then based on this particular information, the pregnant diabetics or hyperglycemia in pregnancy, the A1C is seen every month. This is how this recommendation is based on, that 1 month also you should see the change. So this is very important for you clinicians to appreciate, because this is not very well described in any books that it can be used this way. We use this, for example, Ramadan fasting is 1 month period. So we use that in Ramadan fasting to see whether control deteriorates. And this is a very early paper on Ramadan, which is published in some journal in UK. See, and it's very interesting that this journal was not accepted in an Indian journal. So this is sometimes we have to go to a journal abroad, not because we love them, but because the Indian journal rejects our articles. You see, now the glycemic excursions are very important. We know that this is normal glucose profile of a non-diabetic, basal, and very small excursions. And the diabetic, very high basal, and very severe oscillations of blood glucose. You see, this is the profile. So when you do A1C, does it reflect more of a fasting blood glucose or prandial? Does any of these values has more contribution towards the A1C? And if you want to see that, this is very interesting work, very often quoted in all meetings by Monnier. And there what he showed is that when you come from a very high A1C of 10 to about 7.3 or less than 7.3, here the major contributor is the fasting blood glucose, But as you go down, the major contributor is prandial glucose. So prandial glucose comes in control with more difficulty, and that is what you have to address, because now, if possible, you are trying to drive the A1C goal down to not 7 now. Now, many diabetics, it is feasible to go to 6.5 or 6, and I have a good number of my diabetics say 5.7 A1C. And how we do that, I'll describe you a little later, and how A1C changing in my clinic population, I'll give you the data. See, but when you have this kind of reading, you should know that you'll have to address postprandial glucose very, very aggressively, then only you'll get good results. Pregnancy, A1C, there are a lot of fallacies there, because pregnancy is a situation where the ferrokinetics change, the erythrocyte kinetics change considerably. You see, there can be some deficiency of iron, quite often is rampant, and there can be sometimes folate and B12 deficiency. In spite of that, if you standardize A1C a large number of pregnant population, diabetic or non-diabetic, then you have really established the normative data. And this is what has been done, notwithstanding the limitations of this estimation in pregnancy. And non-pregnant, we consider when it is 6.5, the controls. Pregnant really, ambient blood glucose is low in pregnancy. Don't be surprised when you're treating a pregnant diabetic, getting, with whatever simple treatments you use, sometimes maybe even metformin, which is permitted, though not ideal, or insulin, whatever you use, the fasting glucose can be 60. But the patient will not complain much of hypoglycemia. Some or other, the threshold for perception of hypoglycemia and triggering of counter-regulatory responses is lowered in pregnancy. And therefore, because really the normal non-diabetic women pregnant often have a fasting blood glucose of 60, 65. So considering that, your goal in pregnancy should be stricter, and this is what has been described by many authors. This author has calculated trimester-wise what should be the A1C, normal A1C in pregnancy. Third trimester, slight rise by 0.2 or 0.3, see? But otherwise, first and second trimester, this should be the leak, you see? Okay, so it's somewhat lower than the non-pregnant state. If you do the pre-pregnancy counseling, preconception counseling, versus those which are seen straight at 6 to 38 weeks of pregnancy, the congenital anomalies can be reduced considerably. This is a very famous paper from East Germany. It's a very interesting paper when it came, and it was hailed as a very important one. You see that you can reduce the congenital anomalies in diabetic pregnancy to bringing down to a non-diabetic range. This is not diabetic range of congenital malformations. So this is interesting. And of course, you know very well that depending upon the A1C level, you can have congenital malformation and perinatal mortality, and at less than 6.9, you see, this is close to non-diabetic, 3% is non-diabetic, and perinatal mortality is also similar. So A1C, this is how we derive what should be the goal. What should be the goal is derived by comparing what eliminates the problems, clinical problems. And this is how, and one of course is simple statistical by doing the parameter in large number of people, and second is by seeing the clinical correlation of which value really is giving you a problem-free life to your patient, and this is probably 6.9. And if possible, you can go below that, and many pregnant women, now we go below this very well. And of course, you see this pre-pregnancy and standard care again, same thing, so I'll pass on this rapidly. Now this is another very important facet of glycated hemoglobin in which we were involved almost about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I must tell you that now diagnosis of diabetes is not made by glucose tolerance test at all. It's totally outdated. Diagnosis of diabetes is now made by A1C and then isolated blood glucose attached with it, and preferably maybe a postprandial blood glucose. Because A1C is a very stable analyte, does not change very fast, the life of the sample which you have is stable for 1 week, even at room temperature. You can put a drop on a drop on a blotting paper and even ship it, and the A1C can be estimated. And therefore, it is going to become the main test for even epidemiological purposes. As soon as it becomes more automated and faster and less expensive, you will not be doing blood sugars, blood glucoses when you do epidemiological studies. You'll be doing A1C, which is what will happen in the next 5 years or so. And this was described by us much before any author and presented in one of the meetings, 1982, in the international meeting. And we showed that A1C can diagnose diabetes to a great extent. There can be a few false negative values, a very small, where the hyperglycemia is a very recent onset. Like a type 1 diabetes, sometimes the hyperglycemia is just 5 days old and the child is sick and enters the hospital with ketoacidosis, and A1C may be normal because those 5 days have not had enough time to do any glycosylation. So that is a possibility. So this has been now worked out very much in great detail, and this is how it is accepted. And as for any test, you have to compare the sensitivity versus specificity. Specificity means if you say that person is diabetic, it is true. If sensitivity, you detect every diabetic and do not leave out anybody. And we always decide the parameters or depending upon the combination of both sensitivity and specificity, and on that basis it has been found that, you see, 5.6 is a cutoff value. So 5.7, we say above 5.7 or above is impaired glucose tolerance test, above 6.5 is diabetes. This is absolutely accepted and hardcore scientific fact. 5.7 to 6.5 is impaired glucose tolerance test. See, your glucose can change day to day when you go to same people, but this does not change. And this has the sensitivity 83%, specificity 84%, which is very good for any lab test. So let's go on rapidly. Important test in all research studies. You see, you lowered it with 2% in DCCT, 1% leukopenias, and these were the benefits derived, mainly microvascular. See, targets, what should be the targets? Now, when we treat diabetes, there are three parameters we see, A, B, C. A is the glycated hemoglobin, B the blood pressure, C the cholesterol. And how many goals do we achieve in practice in clinics? And this is data from Anne Haynes at different periods, and goals are changing. But remember, achieving all three goals is such a small number of people. No Indian investigator wants to give you data. I'll give you my data very soon, but I've not seen anyone else giving. I don't know what is the reason. You see, but anyway, remember that all the goals cannot be achieved in the same people. It's very difficult. But of all the goals, the lipid goals are easiest to achieve. Blood pressure is next easy. The glycemic goals are the most difficult. And that is changing now for last 3 or 4 years. I'll show you data on that. The glycemic goals have become easier to achieve now for the reasons very simple. We have drugs at our command which are not producing hypoglycemia. So you can push them without any worry about hypoglycemia and produce results. And this is what is happening. How do you really decide what is the normal A1C should be, in people? And what is the complication, which is what we call a pure complication. I call it a pure complication. Retinopathy is a pure complication of hyperglycemia. Heart myocardial infarction is not. Stroke is not. You see, because it is actually exactly the glycemia multiplied by time, and that determines the retinopathy and also nephropathy, but not the macrovascular other complications. So this is retinopathy in the large population, again, Anne Haynes data. And as soon as you go to certain A1C, here you see, you start retinopathy rising. And you go further up, it takes a vertical up. So this is how we derive what should be normal or what should be the goal. This is how scientifically it's derived. The goals change depending upon this. This is a very famous paper. You keep seeing it in many lectures. Very important. Depending upon these factors, your A1C goals change. So please don't set same figure of 7 that patients know because it's there in Times of India, Indian Express, everywhere. 7%. But that's not correct. And funnily enough, sometimes some joker from Britain gives some statement that 8.5 is all right. So my patient told, sir, it is written in Times of India today, some England, they say 8.5 is okay. Under what circumstances they were saying it is almost taking like a poor politician's lecture out of context and quoting, The poor doctor's lecture taking out of context and quoting. You see, you can have 8.5 in a long-standing type 2 diabetic suffering from very bad complications, having recurrent hypoglycemia, very poor family support, uneducated, some other problems. There you can say, okay, I'm happy with 8.5, but otherwise, these are the factors which determine, and please keep revising your goals. I'll go a little fast to save time. This again published in one of our papers where we have shown that the goals should be different in different circumstances, brought out by many authors, but some of this was brought out by me much before all of those fellows in some of the papers published. And in pregnant diabetic, we have now made 3 categories of A1C goal. This has not been done by any author. You see, gestational diabetic, your goals can be very tight. Pre-gestational type 2, slightly relaxed. Type 1, 7 should be very good because it's very difficult to do anything better than that unless you use an insulin pump. I'll have to pass on some of these slides quickly in the interest of time. But remember that global status of glycemic goals was very poor about 15, 20 years ago. It was 8.5 in America, it was 8.5 in Germany. You see some of these slides, you see. This is what the status was. It's changing very fast. You see, this is our data from 2007 to 11. And you can see, this was when the patients came to our clinic. We consider these both categories as good control in our clinic, almost up to 7.5 also, because I get only complicated patients. All simple ones are treated by all of you people. I get very difficult ones, which nobody wants to even take up those cases, you see. So these 2 we consider good. So this is how they came. And uncontrolled was 60%, and we were able to control half of them well. This was the status until 2011. Look how it is changing now. Again, they present like this, 64 uncontrolled, this much good control, this much can be fair control. You see, this is what it is. Now we are going to 60, 65, 60% very well controlled, 60%. Why this is happening is because of introduction of DPP-4 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors, and GLP-RAs in the therapy. 3 very, very effective therapies which do not cause hypoglycemia. Limitation of A1C. See, you see here, this is data from DCCT showing that you can have A1C of 6.8 with this kind of glucose profile, very bad one, and this very good glucose profile. Means very high and very low sugars cancel each other and give you the same average as this one. So this was realized long back. This is how CGMS came. This is how it was re-emphasized that doing blood glucose is required. A1C doesn't solve all your problems or doesn't give all the information. Hemolytic anemia, of course, A1C will be low because the erythrokinetics will be faster. This was another one of our work. We are seeing the erythrocyte lifespan in people with hemoglobinopathies and see how their A1C goes. So this was another published data by us. You see, iron deficiency anemia, this is very common. So a common question I was asked is that what happens to the person with anemia, A1C? Remember that stable anemia, A1C doesn't change. So hemoglobin is 10 and remains 10. There's no treatment going on, your A1C is correct. But when you're treating the erythrokinetic change, the rapid hemopoiesis, younger RBCs are added, which would not have witnessed the same degree of hyperglycemia, so overall reading is low. So remember that stable phase of anemia, there is not much change, but a dynamic or kinetic phase where it is changing, A1C can change. So you have to be aware of that. I think we go over rapidly. So correlations of A1C and blood glucose, I told you the problem involved. You see, the advantage of measuring A1C is a faithful reflection of average blood glucose. 3 months, or like I told you, mainly 2 months. You see, and of course, you see, it gives you very good indication of microvascular complications because they are all related to glycemic exposure. See, it's an excellent parameter in diagnosis that I told you. Non-manipulable, patient cannot change it. Very, very sturdy kind of analysis in the laboratory. And drawbacks is that it does not reflect glycemic excursions, you see, and does not reflect short and medium term glucose. Like you want to see 15 days average, you can't do it with it. There some other tests are required like glycated albumin of fructosamine, you see, is required. You see, it cannot be used for diagnosis of hypoglycemia. You can't diagnose by that. You cannot change your treatment by looking at A1C, except that very low, control is good. But where is the problem? Then which drug should be changed? And remember, it can have false low and false high depending upon the methodology. So this is the summary where I have already pointed out some of the important points I have emphasized. So I think you can quickly read while I think if the chairpersons allow a minute or two of questions, I'll answer.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a very nice talk, practical talk on HbA1c. I think we can take one or two questions if someone from the audience. I would request you to introduce yourself first, sir.